Yeah, so let's see. I first got involved with computers in the mid-'80s, I guess, and found my way to Cal Arts as a grad student and got my master's in, oh, we're good, we're up, experimental animation. And back then, computers were very experimental. They were also very popular, so I didn't really focus on the computers because we only had 3 and everybody wanted to be on them. So I did primarily worked with like direct animation, which is where you animate directly onto the strip of film itself. I was very inspired by a filmmaker named Stan Brakhage, who some of you may have heard of, who I took classes from as an undergraduate at the University of Colorado. But I was very interested in computers, and after Cal Arts, I found my way to Pacific Data Images, which at that time in '91 was the oldest computer animation company in existence in the world. And then kind of things happened from there. So tonight I'm going to talk about kind of VR in general, I guess, and the power of animated storytelling in VR, which is what the company that I founded called Baobab Studios does. It's interactive storytelling in virtual reality. Now, there's a lot of people that say that they're storytellers in virtual reality, and there's a lot of different definitions for what that can mean. From the story that you tell after you experience something in a VR headset, to a journalistic story. And what we're really focused on is kind of classic traditional storytelling, you know, with a 3-act structure and an inciting incident and progressive complications, and leading to a climax that is absolutely unexpected and yet, on reflection, inevitable. And we're also doing this with a viewer inside the experience, participating in that experience. So what makes it different than a game is that the viewer isn't like in charge or in control of the story that's happening around them, but the viewer has an opportunity to play a part. So there's some films I made. Ants, I was a director. I was a director and writer on all the Madagascar films, and obviously learned an awful lot on the job once DreamWorks bought PDI, and I stumbled into a directing role. And I really did stumble because I had left PDI and actually gone to DreamWorks because I wanted to do entertainment work in computers. And meanwhile, DreamWorks was trying to figure out how to do a full-blown computer animated studio. At the time, they were working on Prince of Egypt, which was traditionally animated. And so Katzenberg and his top execs struck a deal. I didn't even know this with PDI. And then they went up there and announced this big deal, and they're going to make a feature film at PDI. And somebody in the crowd raised their hand because they knew I'd gone to DreamWorks and said, "Is Eric going to work on the movie?" And Katzenberg goes, "You bet he is." But he'd never talked to me about that. And so I get a phone call as they're driving in the limo back to the airport, and one of the executives says, "Hey, Eric, we just bought PDI and wanted to know if you wanted to work on a movie." So whoever raised their hand basically got me that job. And you know, I had no idea. None of us knew what we were doing, right? We never made a film before. But Katzenberg watched us like a hawk, and we managed to get Ants out the door in a really tight schedule. We knew we had to come out before Bug's Life, or we would only be compared to Bug's Life. And we did. And then, yeah, then the rest of those movies is like 20 years of my career. So, there we go. But then I left DreamWorks about 3 years ago. I kind of felt like I was repeating myself. And through a mutual friend, I met Maureen Fan. She was a vice president at Zynga at the time, responsible for the Farmville franchise and many others. She was like, I don't know, she majored in art and psychology and computer science at Stanford, and then did anthropology for eBay, traveling over the world, doing anthropological research for eBay, and then really wanted to start an animation studio. But her tiger mom said, no, but I will pay for you to go to Harvard Business School. So she went to Harvard Business School and got her MBA. And then Larry Cutler, also a Stanford grad, did his master's thesis on virtual reality in the mid-90s and realized it was too early for it to really be a viable industry, and then went on to do engineering work for Pixar and DreamWorks. This is some of our advisors. Marie Soria in the middle is in charge of Paramount Animation right now. She was a producer on all the Madagascar films. Incredibly talented, really smart. I learned a lot about storytelling from her. Albert Ray Smith founded Pixar many years ago. Absolute great guy. Glenn Keane, probably the best living animator alive. Chris Milk, you may know from his VR company Within, and others. So, this is Larry's daughter, by the way, who's pretending to be crying. So, it's a little kind of thought experiment that we came up with. What if you're out jogging in the morning in Central Park or something? The sun's just coming up, nobody's around, and you see a little girl all by herself, too young to be by herself, crying on a park bench. So what do? Well, if it's a film, you don't do anything, right? You just sympathize with her, empathize with her, you may care about her, but obviously there's no expectation of any kind of interaction, right? If it's a game, well, games are all about interacting, right? So there's a lot of motivation to interact with this girl. Often the motivation, though, comes from the fact that you are in a game. It's about solving a puzzle, getting to the next level, getting something you need to survive. And it's very kind of you-focused, right? Of course, if it's life, you'll empathize with this girl, and most of us would probably take some kind of action. Look for a parent, go talk to her, see if she needs some help. Of course, your motivation to do this is not about winning, it's about taking that empathy you feel and putting it into action, which is what compassion is all about. So, film, deep empathy, no agency, no control. The story just plows forward no matter what you do. A game, you've got a lot of agency. It's often goal-driven. You're the main character. And often you're in control of the pacing of time. You know, it's, as long as it's going to take you to solve that puzzle, that's how much time you've got, right? And in real life, your actions are often driven by concern or empathy, and that river of life is going to keep flowing whether or not you decide to step into it. And so there you go. You put those all together, and I'd like to think of VR as kind of being right in the middle of it. You've got the powerful potential for agency that you have in life and games. You've got the bigger than daily life kind of stories that you can experience in games and films. And you've got this great power to generate empathy and then the subsequent compassion that comes with it. And so this is what we're kind of focused on at Baobab. This is just a great graphic. A California high school teacher made this, but it really shows the steps towards engagement. And we want to get the viewer all the way to compassion. So what we're doing at Baobab is it's all animated. And there's some real pluses and there's some real minuses to that. The minus is that it's really, really expensive. It takes a lot of really super talented people, experts in their field. You know, you've got to have the talent to have a great story, to make this beautiful imagery, and to have it all run in real time, 90 frames a second. That's 11 milliseconds twice for each eye. And if it takes 12 milliseconds, you don't get that image. It has to be 11 milliseconds or less. And so it definitely takes a lot of firepower, and those people are expensive, and it takes a lot of time too. But what we get out of that is we get the ability to interact with another character in a believable way. The experience itself can actually change based upon the choices that you make, because we're running in real time. So in our first piece, Invasion, you look down, you've got the body of a little white bunny, you're out on a frozen lake. If you squat, your belly sticks out, and another bunny from the shore spots you and hops over and looks you in the eye. And if you move around, she follows you. And just that simple thing, that simple, basic act of communication, the way that we all communicate with each other, even with animals and our pets and what have you, I really underestimated how powerful that was going to be. And I saw it in action when people put the headset on. You know, this is 3 years ago or whatever, so everybody was new to VR, at least not everybody, but most people. And people put the headset on, and the bunny would come up and they'd laugh and they'd reach out and try to touch it and they'd talk to it. And if the bunny did something, they might copy it and do it back. And I was like, what the hell is going on? What is happening? And it's like it struck me that this was something very, very different than filmmaking. It's not just an extension of filmmaking. It's its own medium, with its own kind of an experience. And of course, there's a percentage of your brain that believes that it's all absolutely real. And you're getting, obviously, a lot of cues that make you think that too, especially with these characters. So another reason why animation is great right now is because it's easier to suspend our disbelief. We don't bring a lot of expectations into an animated piece. It's a world, it's all designed, you don't judge it as critically as you do in real life. And the technology now for real life in VR, it's getting better all the time, and it's gonna get there. But right now, well, you can see the difference between what your eye can pick up and what the Oculus Rift can pick up. So when you're looking at real life, you're looking through that screen with pixels, and it's obvious. So that's going to continue to get better, and with the, I'm not going to say this right, but like fovea rendering, where you can actually only rendering in high resolution where your eyeball is actually looking at on the screen, will all help that, and we'll get there, but we're not there yet. So I just want to talk then a little bit about this piece that we're doing now. Well, first let me back up. So Invasion was our first piece. It was about 6 minutes long. It's about a little bunny and you, another bunny, and some aliens come down to take over the planet, and you and your buddy friend outwit them, even though they have superior firepower. It was inspired by War of the Worlds, because I was watching the original War of the Worlds, and it's like, these are the dumbest advanced aliens ever, right? They just forgot about microbiology, and they just killed themselves through the sheer stupidity. Classic Deus Ex Machina ending. And so I thought, well, what if we took it up a notch and they didn't account for the power of a little white bunny? And so that's that story. And then we took those two aliens and we did a piece that was much more interactive, because now the hand controllers are out, called Asteroids. And that gave the viewer the ability to actually reach out and touch things in the world. And there's actually a script for that. I don't know how many people have seen Asteroids. Anybody? A few. But the aliens basically talk gibberish, but the secret is it's not gibberish. I actually wrote a whole script in English and then just turned all the words backwards and wrote them out phonetically. And then Elizabeth Banks, who played the other alien opposite me, came in, and I had to read the lines of dialogue in English so she could get performance, and then read the gibberish. Well, it's actually a language, right? It's English backwards. So what happened, she says when she wakes up, and so that becomes et denapa, is what she actually says in the piece. So you can decipher all that. And whoever does, sends me a correct script, I'll send you a stuffed bunny from Invasion. So Elizabeth Banks was great. You know, I've learned through the years that it's great to have a name that you can go out and promote your film with, but it's even more valuable to have the talent, because there's a reason why these people are famous, because they're damn good at what they do. And Elizabeth just brought all this life to this character called Cheese. The two aliens are called Mac and Cheese because the head of animation, who's Polish, his favorite American food was mac and cheese. And so we decided to call him that. It was funny because he would show me his animation. He showed me his animation one day, and I said, well, this looks really good to me. Do you need any more notes? And he goes, no, I'll just do what you said here, and then I'll just go and just polish and polish and polish it till it's done. didn't even realize what you're saying. Okay, and then we kind of struck out on this more ambitious piece called Crow, the Legend. And it stars John Legend. And a lot of people had asked him if he would be interested in doing some work in VR. But we were the lucky ones that he actually liked our story. There's a Native American legend about a group of animals in the forest. It's always sunny and warm. Their lives are basically perfect. And then one day, for the first time, winter comes. And they need to do something about it. Somebody's got to go find the one who creates everything by thinking and convince the Great Spirit to make it warm again. So they go around the room, and the turtle's too slow, and the skunk is too smelly. But Crow is beautiful. He's got all the colors of the rainbow in his feathers, and this beautiful singing voice, John Legend. And so reluctantly, he goes on this journey up into outer space to find the Great Spirit, who we're lucky enough to get Oprah to make the voice out. And she could play a god, right? And then she says, well, I can't do anything about the weather. That's the spirit of the seasons. But I can give you this. And she gives him fire, a torch with fire. And he brings it back. And along the way, the smoke gets into his lungs. And the fire burns his feathers. And so by the time he returns, he's destroyed his voice. And he's lost all of his colors. But he saved all the animals. But he's devastated. Because this is how he defined himself. He was the star. He has a big show coming up at the pond, and now he can't do it because he feels like he's lost everything that gives him value. But then the Great Spirit shows up and says, in the classic Native American legend, says, oh, you don't understand. I've given you a great gift. There's another animal coming to the forest called man. And when man came here, if they saw you the way you used to be, they would put you in a cage so they could look at your beautiful feathers and hear your beautiful voice. But I've taken those away. And so you'll never be in a cage. You'll always be free. And man will never try to eat you because the heat of the fire has burned your flesh bitter. And so I basically saved you from mankind. And in our story, it happens a little bit differently, but it's basically the same thing. We've kind of updated it. We have Constance Wu from Fresh Off the Boat, Ty Sheridan from, well, he was in Star Wars. No, he was in Ready Player One recently. Diego Luna was in Star Wars. Oprah, John Legend. And we have this great Native American advisor, 84 years old, Randy Evans. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's talk about the look of it. Almost design something that, like, what if you could walk into one of your favorite storybooks as a kid? How cool would that be? And so we go, oh, there's John. Hey. So we started working on the design world just with very painterly designs. And what we kind of came across is this idea of this sort of stippled texture on everything, so that everything kind of has this illustrative look to it. And so so this is darkness in the forest, and this is lightness. It's also theatrical kind of approach that we're taking, where lights kind of come on. It's not based on where the sun is, it's just about theater, right? And so one of the guys that founded the company with us, that wasn't on the earlier page, Michael Hutchinson, is our chief scientist, and he took this art and sat down in front of his computer and started analyzing it. Its softness, it has this noise pattern in it, there's this sort of divot effect on surfaces, these edges that have to be transparent, or these bushes are going to look like hard rocks, and yet at the same time, let's do this in a way that we can run this at 90 frames a second. And if we had, 1,000 leaves in that bush, we'd have trouble with just the bush, not to mention the entire forest environment. So this is what it looks like with just a classic old plastic shader on it. And so if you're not worrying about frame rate, you can just do what any computer animator would do, and just put fur on things. And that makes everything soft. You can use fur shaders to grow grass or fur. and just make everything feel more organic. But we couldn't do that because it was just not powerful enough to render that approach. It's very, you need a really big pipe for that. So Michael came up with this other idea. This just looks like a noise pattern, but this is where he started in an effort to put this sort of textural quality on everything. The challenge is that if you just put noise onto the surfaces of objects, the stuff that's close to you will have a big fat pixels, and the stuff really far away, all those pixels will just go off into a shade of gray. And what we needed to have, if it's going to look like an illustration, stuff that's far away has to have the same resolution on its surfacing as stuff that's really up close and in front of you. And it's got to look good from all angles. You can't just slap it on as a post-process. So, you'll see some depth now if this works. There you go. Now, and see the stuff really far away and the stuff up close, all has the same resolution on it. So, it's sort of indicative of, if you had a, if I stop it, it kind of flattens out. If you had a brush, not literally, but kind of. And then we put it into the piece. So you can see like some of the soft edges on the bushes on the right side of the screen over here. But everything has the same dither texture to it. The rocks, the tree trunk, the actual leaves that we've rendered. And so what I'll show you now, this is like a headset capture. So it's a little bit shaky, but you'll kind of see how this plays out. And pay attention to the skunk's tail. There's sound here that doesn't.
Any luck?
No, nothing over here.
Hey, what are you doing? What, you little...
Wait. Easy. Come on, Vicky. It's not for me.
Yeah, right. I knew you weren't gonna.
Hey, who's your amigo? Eh? Thank you.
So kind of, even though the world is fairly simple, like we ended up adding more stuff to the ground plane, but even with that sort of cucaloris effect and that sort of subtle dither texture, it makes it much more pleasing than if it was just this flat surface. And then the other thing to mention is that these characters, we've come up with a proprietary system. It's a fairly complicated deformation system that allows these characters to move. And we couldn't make those kinds of calculations on the fly. Sometimes we do, sometimes we just can't always do it. And again, the genius of these engineers figured out this way to get this animation into the system that I can't even begin to describe. So to talk a little bit more about this fur, what we actually do is do a little fur map. So her tail has much softer fur, and then you can see it's very tight up on the body. And then here you see her, this is sort of the inside of her crust, and then there's the outside. So this is always going to be solid, and this is going to fade off into that dither. And then you can see with this alpha channel image, wherever it gets dark is where it gets transparent. So the tail is the most transparent. You can see little edges on her legs when they overlap, where you just get a tiny little bit of softness. But these are the kind of things that you can do with animation to create these imaginary worlds that at the same time gives the viewer an understanding of what it would actually be to reach out and touch these things. They have real texture to them. They have a vibrancy and a richness that, oh, here she is. Whoever posed her face is fired. Look at those eyes. But, so this is the final render. One of the things that is really difficult about making these connections with characters is that so much of what we've had to learn has less to do with filmmaking than it has to do with psychology. So and actually neuroscience. As an example, there was a study done at Stanford where there was a computer-animated salesman that did a sales pitch. And for the control group, the computer-animated salesman just did the pitch. And for the test group, they had somebody in a mocap suit hidden from the test subject who could define the pose of the computer-animated character on the fly. So if the test subject changed their pose or crossed their leg, then they waited 4 seconds, and then the computer-animated character, via the mocap system, would adapt the same pose. And none of the test subjects recognized that they were being mirrored. But they were 30% more likely to buy the product and 30% more likely to say that they liked the salesman. And it's all happening subconsciously. So there's a little beat that we put in Asteroids that nobody ever finds, but we just wanted to test it out for ourselves. There's a little robot pet that flies around in the story, and when you're playing fetch, because there's a moment where you can play fetch with it, if you don't throw the ball, it's kind of like the dog. It's like it's all excited. If you don't throw the ball, it kind of calms down. It goes, oh, we're not going to play anymore. And then if you tilt your head to the side, the little character does the same thing. It looks like that. And it's super powerful. Very few people discover it. But the opportunity for that, when we tell people to, go ahead and cock your head to the side, and then they see the little character mirror them, they're like, oh my God. Little moments like that are super duper powerful. There was another story I wanted to tell you, but I can't remember what it is. But by mirroring and by having characters respond to you in a believable way, it's remarkable how much power that has. So, speaking of compassion, actually, I heard this on Radiolab, so maybe a lot of you have already heard this before. But Andrew Carnegie started the Carnegie Hero Awards back at the beginning of the last century, and it's like it's cash money and a medallion that goes to those people who do amazing acts of heroism. And it continues to this day. Sometimes the awards are given I can't never pronounce this word, posthumously, yeah, because the people died in their efforts to save somebody else's life. Robert Sapolsky, who is a neuroendocrinologist, wrote this book called Behave, which is pretty fascinating. It's sort of about, basically why are we always so mad at each other, or having words or whatever. But he was curious about these people that were doing these great acts of heroism, and they were able to talk to some of these people. Like there was this woman who was driving down the road and saw another woman being attacked by a bull. She leapt out of her car, went through an electric fence, and distracted the bull and dragged this woman out. The woman would have died if she hadn't done that. There was a guy who heard a crash and he went out his front door, and there was a car full of teenagers engulfed in flames, having just run into a tree, with other people standing around looking at it. And this guy went into the car and pulled all the kids out. And so when you ask those people, you must think like, oh my God, they must be feeling so much empathy. They must care so much to take that risk. And when you ask the people what they were thinking, they go, I wasn't thinking anything, I just did it. And this was completely confusing. Like, why? Wait a minute, they're just like a robot? They just do it? And the more he dug into their past, he realized that these people were people from the time they were kids. They were raised by their parents to be compassionate. They were taught the value of compassion. So it's a little bit like, it's like that. If you really feel someone's pain, it's going to be harder maybe to do what you might do otherwise. And the way Sapolsky described it was a little like piano practice. Like their whole life they've been doing acts of compassion. So put that into practicing piano. You play this piece over and over again. You come to this difficult measure. You stumble through it every time. It's all frustrating. You dread when you're going to get there. You always you always make a mistake, and then one day you've just played right through that measure, and you're 5 measures down the road, and you realize, wait a minute, I did that. I just did that without even thinking. And then, when the stakes are high, and then you get out on stage and you play that piece in your recital, you can play that difficult measure because you've done what you need to do. You've practiced over and over again. So these people have been practicing acts of compassion their entire lives. So when it hit the fan, they didn't have to think about anything. In fact, if they had thought about it, they might not have done anything. And so this is just a quote taken from the book, Behave. And this is what I'll end on, and it's a big stretch. I admit it, but I sort of wonder, like, if in fact there could be a value to VR besides just the gee-whiz factor, and there are many obvious values to VR for medicine and education, health. I said medicine, manufacturing, training. And entertainment. But I do wonder if we can tell the kinds of stories that put you in a situation where you can practice acting compassionately when the stakes are low. If maybe that's one selling point for VR in the future. The more you practice, you take the headset off, maybe you'd be more inclined to step into that bold pit. So, that's what I have. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to do a Q&A. So if we have some questions, I'm going to ask my volunteer, Sabrina, and then maybe Lisa, could you also help? Run some mics. They'll already be on, so don't push a button, okay? No button pushing. Do we have any questions? Okay, you want to, oh, yeah, sure. Let's start with now and then this, it'll be second.
Thank you. I love your talk. You had mentioned health and medicine. Where do you see VR playing a role in that wide range of possibilities?
Well, it's being used to treat people with PTSD, kids with attention deficit disorder, people in a lot of pain. There's one story that I haven't really completely, I'm not sure if it's really true or if it's all true, but the story as I read it is that they were using, with paraplegics, they were using VR to train them to use their brain to send signals to a mechanical mechanism that would allow them to walk, basically an armature that would fit around the legs. They didn't even have the armature built yet. They were just, so what they did was they put VR on people's heads, and then if they could send the right electrical signals, then their virtual legs would do what they needed to be done. So they could train these people in theory without having to build the expensive armature, so they could test the idea out first. And it was very hard work, really intensive mental and in some ways physical work. And these people had to put their heart and soul into trying to get their brains to send the signals to have their legs do the right thing. And what they found was that people started to feel in their legs after months and months of intensive work. In their actual legs, they could start. You could touch their toe and they could say, "I feel that now." And somehow, because they've been working so hard, they just, who knows? They don't know how they did it, but somehow their brain was able to find a path down to those legs and have the beginnings of getting feeling again. I don't know. That's a pretty hard one for me to really wrap my head around, knowing how, what happens when you sever your spine. I don't know how those connections are being made or how rigorous the study was. But
they actually showed that the new nerves were actually starting to grow and reattach to create those sensations.
So there's just a lot of potential, and there's more that we haven't discovered than we have discovered. Anybody that says they know a lot about VR is delusional or lying. because it's so brand new. You know, we learn new stuff every day, and I became like, I was forced into humility. You know, I thought, hey, I've done all these movies, I can go do a VR, 3D movie, no big deal, right? I'm a filmmaker. And then I just made all these mistakes. You know? Like there's a moment in Invasion when the spaceship carrying the aliens is sort of behind a grove of trees, and it's going to come over the top of the trees, and the viewer's going to see it, and it's going to like, it goes right over their head and like hovers over here. And I said, well, this is a perfect time for me to be a filmmaker. And I'll build up all this dramatic tension, and you'll hear the sound getting louder, and the music will swell, and the viewers will be looking up at the moment, right when the ship comes over the top. But after about 3 seconds of that, people just went, well, where the hell is it? And they started looking, and nobody was looking, nobody saw the ship come over the trees. And then it kind of came over, and it flew over their head, and it landed over here, and I'm like, what's going on? And so I realized that I had to cut the time down. I had to watch the viewers watch the piece, and I watched over 1,000 people go through the invasion experience so that I could learn all the things I was doing wrong. So yeah, there's an awful lot in there. I'll let you guys pick. Since you have
stand up, yeah. And then where was our hand over here? Yeah, let's give him for the third question.
Going back to one of your closing statements, what kind of compassion exercise do you envision for VR?
Well, for me, it happens in the context of storytelling. So, moments when the viewer can step in and do something that needs to be done. And I'm not saying we've cracked the code or anything, but all we're trying to do is to get the viewer to care. Like you would care in a story or a movie or whatever, to care. And to care enough that like, hey, I don't even have to just sit here, I can actually step in and be a participant. So there's a moment in Asteroids, the first time we tried anything like this really, there's a moment in Asteroids where one of the aliens basically just died in the med bay. And the other alien is devastated. And this is a comedy, by the way. And you, the viewer, play this sort of helper robot, and you haven't been getting any respect, and you've been making mistakes, and they've been frustrated with you, and yet now they realize that you and your specialized hands have the power to bring this alien back to life. And when the alien realizes that, he looks at you and he says, well, in gibberish, but essentially he says, oh my God, you can do it. You've got the hands. All you need to do is to do that thing you know how to do, and everything's going to be okay. And most viewers will go, yeah, I want to do it. I want to help the guy. But if you don't do it right away, then the alien, it does what anybody would do in real life. It's just like, oh my God, you can help me. Come on, let's go. Here we go. And then it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You gotta help him. And then he gets more and more angry. My God, why are you just standing there? And so at any time in there, the viewer can make the choice to help. And pretty much everyone does. But if you don't, then the little robot dog I talked about before is like looking at its master and looking at you and looking at your hand, master and hand, you, master hand, and then finally the robot dog just rips your hand off and goes and does it himself. So if you make the choice to help the aliens, then once the aliens come back to life, they hug each other. This alien's realized the value of the friendship that he was not really valuing earlier in the story, and then he turns to you and basically says, thank you, I'm so glad you're a member of our team. And then he bows to you. And the other alien who was brought back to life is like, he did, he saved me, and then he bows too, and then it's dance party. But if you don't, then the aliens revive, they hug each other, and they never look at you again. that doesn't quite answer your question, but those are the kind of situations that we want to put viewers in where they feel like, it's not like branching narratives. It's hard enough to tell one story, at least right now in VR, that's good. We kind of maintain control of the spine, but it's branching emotions based upon the choices that you make. So you're kind of rewarded for taking any empathy you might feel and turning it into action.
Okay, next question over here.
Hi, I just had a practical question. You have a just high-end crew, feature film level, but you're releasing these in festivals. So I'm curious how you see sort of the funding model of this working long-term. How studios would be willing to take a risk on that with that level of expense?
Yeah, it's a tough time in VR right now because people don't want to spend a bunch of money on headsets because there's no content. And people don't want to spend money on content because there's no headsets out there, right? So I think last I heard there was maybe, somebody here probably knows better than I, there were like 10 million VRs out there in the world. That's not a market, we need 10 times at least that many headsets out there. So we give our stuff away. And we were fortunate enough that when we were doing our funding, it was the right time. All the VCs were like, as every VC wanted to fund a VR company. And so our first round, we raised $6 million, and then the next round, we raised like 25 million. So we have like, not anymore, but at that point we had $31 million in the bank. And so our plan is to stay small. We're like a couple dozen people. Stay small, keep our burn rate really low. I fly coach everywhere. Our salaries are really low, and we're just trying to survive. We're pretty conservative. I think, it could be 5 years before there's a real market, a meaningful market. That's not maybe as true for games. I think people are maybe already making money if they have a really great game right now. I don't know, but I assume so. But that's not what we're doing, so we'll just have to see. Maybe there'll be enough of a market, and in that time, when the market arises, we've established ourselves, as a brand that's meaningful, standing on a foundation of content that says that we know what we're doing, and then we can start charging. Or maybe we'll just get acquired by, some eye of Mordor that finally turns to VR, right? And has the money to back it up. So, we'll see.
Thanks.
Oh,
All right, next question from everyone over to him. Yeah. And then we'll do this one next. I'll just go ahead and
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I feel kind of like the character not knowing how to use my hands that you had mentioned in your story. And I'm a traditional prop guy for film and TV, and we were talking about this earlier about how do you see, or how are you using currently, or how does the traditional film community support in either the paid crew capacities or the development capacities, or how do we? I'm also the vice president of our local union, and so I'm looking at how do we provide opportunities for our crew to start looking at, besides coming to talks like this and seeing how it's happening, and playing with headsets and doing that stuff. How do you see that transition happening, or how can we help facilitate that?
Well, I think for live action, there's already opportunities for people to do that kind of thing, especially if you're talking about the stuff that isn't necessarily a documentary, but is a story in VR. So many of the things that you would do on a live action VR set are not that different than what you do on a live action film set.
Okay.
So right now it's it's such a small world.
Right.
There's not that many people doing it, and a lot of times the budgets are probably really low on average, and so it will. If VR takes off, then it will come, and I think people like you and in your union will be able to step over and be a part of that. And in the meantime, you're doing the right thing, I think, getting yourself educated and finding out who's who in the industry and talking to people that may, if not now, but maybe in the near future, may be looking for somebody with exactly your expertise. Cool.
Okay, I think we're just going to do maybe two more. So right here and then one more. Can you refer to that?
So you use the examples of depth of field and then also the texture. But what are some other challenges the experiences of your storytelling experience that, whether it's the design and the animation that you have to come across, I say more than often?
Well, the biggest challenges come back to, for me at least, come back to how do I put the viewer in the story and yet not make them the main character. I haven't really figured out how to have that successful story and have the viewer be the main character. I was researching this a little bit and I saw, well, you know, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the last, speaking of the Eye of Mordor, the last chapter of the last book of the Lord of the Rings takes place in Sam's house with his family. And somebody asked why Tolkien didn't end with the main character, who you assume would be Frodo, right? And his response was, I did end the book with the main character. So, to me that was like a clue, because, and I'm sure he was toying with the questioner anyway, Sam isn't the main character, but he is the eyes and the ears through which the audience can share the story beyond this journey with Frodo. And it's almost because of Sam and who he is, like, if he's not going to give up on this guy who's being a jerk, at times, then maybe I won't give up on him either. If this guy loves Frodo so much, maybe I can find a way to get through Frodo's challenging times. And so I kind of think of VR storytelling that way, like put the viewer in a position where there's a story that's happening around them, and if they care, then they'll be engaged and they'll participate. If they don't care, then you've lost. And I was going to say something really smart, but I can't remember.
About the main character was?
The main character, yeah. Okay. Well, no, it's not really smart. But one of the things like that McKee says about what storytelling really is all about. Robert McKee, he wrote I think one Columbo episode in his whole life or something. But he traveled the country. He may still be. Would be pretty old, but he traveled the country teaching these 3-day story seminars that were excellent. If he's still out there and you guys are interested and you can find him, then I recommend going to these seminars. They're worth every penny. If you can't, you can pick up his book called Story, which is basically a seminar. But he said that storytelling was all about watching another character make decisions under pressure that reveal something about who they really are. So it's like the mousy librarian, who gets picked on by her boss, and the kids won't be quiet, and she's all hunched over, and with her little sweater, and seemingly incredibly weak. And then as she's coming home from work, there's a apartment building on fire, and there's a kid on the 5th floor, and people standing around watching, like that guy. And she runs in and saves the kid. And suddenly, whatever you thought about her before that event, you now think something very different about her. And it's those kinds of moments in storytelling that we all crave, It's Han Solo coming back, right? It's like, he did come back! He's better than I thought! And that to me is what makes story really powerful. It's discovering these things about these other characters. And then, the literary theorist Kenneth Burke said that these stories are equipment for living. It's not that the stories need to be happening to other people so that we can watch them make these decisions under pressure and learn something about life, and then be armed with maybe an opportunity that we wouldn't have thought of before when that kind of situation arrives in your own life.
Great. Last question?
Thanks. I'm wondering, it's more a practical question, and it's interesting for people, but I know that the asteroids experience was designed for Gear and Daydream, which is like still a 3-DOF experience, but has an additional controller. My first experience with it was actually with cardboard, so it was like more passive. And I'm not sure if you have a 6-DOF experience, but just kind of curious how the process went. I mean, with handheld devices, we talk a lot about mobile first, or we did a long time ago, or whatever. Just kind of wondering, like, where did you start with it? Was it like the more elaborate experience that was then sort of dumbed down, essentially, or did it just start with the story, and then you were like, we can do this here, we can do that there, we can only do this here, or how did that process work?
Yeah, well, of course we always start with the story, and then make sure that whatever we're doing is going to educate us, that we're going to learn something. Everything we do is an experiment. It doesn't make any sense, especially now, to repeat ourselves. We have to be pushing the boundaries and making those mistakes that you have to make. So at the time, Invasion was made primarily on the Oculus or for the Rift. And then we ported it over to a 360 3D video for the Gear VR and other headsets. Asteroids, we have a version for the Rift and the Oculus as well. But just because of scheduling, we decided to port it directly to the lower end headsets and get that out the door, because it's kind of like, we just want eyeballs, we just want people to see our stuff. And you can take the Oculus headset and the Vive headset combined, I think there's less than 1 million of them out there. And so we learned an awful lot by focusing on those high-end headsets at first. But the reality is that if you want people to see your work, it doesn't make sense to ignore the lower end headsets. So we'll see what we can do with Crow the Legend. It's a pretty complicated piece, and I don't yet have a vision for how we could take it to VR. Take it to Gear VR or the other lower end headsets. But at the same time, there's a lot of lower end headsets that are getting better and coming onto the market and allowing for more opportunity for a higher end experience. So I don't know what we'll do with Asteroids. We're so small, we could spend all year just porting to all the headsets that are out there, but we have to draw the line in the sand somewhere and just get work done. Creative work.
All right, round of applause.